The Galactic outpost hummed with the quiet thrum of machinery, its steel corridors dimly lit under a distant star. Captain Elias Kane sat alone in the corner of a rundown bar, nursing a glass of amber liquid. His uniform jacket lay crumpled beside him, the insignia of his former military rank discarded with deliberate carelessness. He traced a finger around the rim of the glass, his mind drifting as conversations buzzed around him. Soldiers from various species celebrated victories, mercenaries bragged about their exploits, and smugglers whispered deals in shadowy corners. Kane stared into his drink, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of disillusionment that had settled deep in his bones. He had given everything to the Terran Defense Corps, his youth, his loyalty, his soul. In return, he'd been used, discarded, and betrayed by the very superiors he had once revered. Politics, greed, and corruption had poisoned the ideals he'd fought for. The final mission had been the breaking point, a botched operation where lives were sacrificed not for victory, but to protect the reputation of some bureaucrat back on Earth. So, he walked away. At first, leaving the military had felt like cutting away a dead limb, but in the cold light of freedom, he found himself adrift, unsure of where to go or who to be. That's when he met the outcasts, other soldiers who had quit or been forced out, scavengers scraping by in the lawless fringes, and mercenaries who lived by their own rules. They introduced him to a different kind of war, one that was fought not for flags or principles, but for survival, credits, and sometimes a strange sense of honor. Kane took small jobs at first, running security for cargo ships or escorting diplomats through hostile territories. It was dirty work, but it paid well. Each job taught him something new: how to negotiate with pirates, how to dismantle alien technology, how to leverage fear as a weapon. His mind, once trained for the rigid discipline of the military, began to stretch into something sharper and more dangerous. One night, he was approached by a grizzled alien named Varric, a former soldier turned mercenary, who led a ragtag team of outlaws from various species. "I heard you're looking for something bigger than babysitting diplomats," Varric said, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "We've got a job, risky, but it'll put you on the map if you survive." Kane raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" "High chance of getting killed," Varric replied with a shrug. "But if you don't die, you'll have enough credits to retire in luxury. Interested?" Kane downed the rest of his drink and stood. "When do we leave?" The mission was simple in theory: rescue a kidnapped diplomat from a heavily guarded alien fortress. In practice, it was suicide. The fortress was surrounded by automated defenses, and the local warlord who held the diplomat wasn't known for negotiating. Most mercenary crews would have walked away from the job, but Kane saw an opportunity. He studied the fortress schematics and spotted vulnerabilities others had overlooked. The defenses were designed to repel frontal assaults, but Kane wasn't planning to attack head-on. Instead, he devised a plan to infiltrate the fortress using an old maintenance tunnel that had been abandoned decades ago. His team would bypass the automated turrets and enter the compound under cover of darkness. The team was skeptical at first. "You sure this tunnel even exists?" one of the aliens muttered, adjusting the charge on his plasma rifle. "Sounds like a myth. If it's not there, we improvise," Kane replied coolly. "Trust me," Varric chuckled, patting Kane on the shoulder. "You've got guts, human. Let's see if that brain of yours is just as sharp." When the time came, the infiltration went almost exactly as planned. Kane led the team through the crumbling tunnel, navigating by instinct and memory. They slipped past guards, neutralizing them with quick precision, and reached the heart of the fortress without raising the alarm. The kidnapped diplomat was alive, terrified, but unharmed. Then, things went sideways. The warlord's troops discovered the intrusion moments before the extraction. Kane and his team found themselves pinned down in a narrow corridor, plasma fire ricocheting off the walls. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Kane's mind raced, calculating probabilities, weighing risks. He spotted an overhead ventilation shaft just wide enough for the diplomat to crawl through. "You, up there!" Kane barked at the diplomat, shoving him toward the vent. "Get to the other side. We'll hold them off." The alien diplomat hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to realize that Kane and his crew were buying him time to escape. "But you'll move!" Kane snapped, firing another shot down the hall. The diplomat disappeared into the vent, and the team braced for the inevitable last stand. But Kane wasn't done yet. He pulled a small, spherical device from his belt, a modified EMP grenade, tweaked just enough to fry the warlord's communications network without disabling their own gear. With a grim smile, Kane tossed the grenade into the corridor. A bright flash erupted, followed by stunned silence as the enemy troops scrambled to reboot their systems. "Now!" Kane shouted, leading his team in a swift, decisive counterattack. Plasma bolts streaked through the corridor as the mercenaries pushed forward, overwhelming the disoriented guards. By the time the enemy reinforcements arrived, Kane's crew was already gone, along with the diplomat. Back on the extraction ship, Varric clapped Kane on the back, his mandibles clicking in approval. "Damn, human. I didn't think we'd make it out of there alive." Kane allowed himself a rare smile. "Neither did I." Word of the mission spread quickly through the mercenary network. The story grew with each retelling. How a human with nothing but a team of misfits had outsmarted an entire fortress. How he had turned certain death into victory with nothing more than guts and a clever plan. Some called him reckless. Others called him brilliant. But one thing was clear. Elias Kane was no ordinary mercenary. As the ship hurtled through the stars, Kane leaned back in his seat, arms folded across his chest. He had tasted his first real victory as a free man, and it was intoxicating. This was a life he could live. No politics, no bureaucrats, no orders from corrupt superiors. Just him, his crew, and the thrill of the next impossible mission. Varric poured 2 glasses of alien liquor and handed one to Kane. "To the start of something big," the alien said, raising his glass. Kane clinked his glass against Varric's, his smile dark and knowing. "This is just the beginning." And with that, the legend of the Mercenary King was born. The next few months were a whirlwind of chaos and glory. Kane's reputation spread like wildfire, and with it came a flood of offers, contracts from warlords, corporations, planetary governors, and rebel factions. Each mission was riskier than the last. Yet Kane thrived in the danger. The galaxy was his battleground now, and he fought not for any nation or cause, but for his crew, and the freedom to live on his own terms. His crew expanded, drawing in outcasts and specialists from every corner of the galaxy. There was Joran, a hulking reptilian bruiser with a knack for demolitions, and Cass, a razor-sharp human sniper with a grudge against half the known universe. Joining them was Lyric, a sly, silver-tongued negotiator from a species known for their treachery, and Talia, a cybernetically enhanced medic who could stitch up wounds while under fire. Varric, of course, stayed at Kane's side, becoming his most trusted lieutenant. Together, they became a force to be reckoned with, a crew that took on impossible missions and made them look easy. Kane's ability to outmaneuver larger, more powerful enemies became the stuff of legend. He could outthink generals, negotiate his way through ambushes, and find weaknesses in the most fortified defenses. And when all else failed, he fought with the ruthless efficiency of someone who had nothing left to lose. The crew's most lucrative contract came from a planetary governor, desperate to reclaim a mining colony seized by pirates. The colony was located on the edge of known space, far from any support, and fortified to withstand a full-scale military assault. The governor's fleet had been decimated in the first attempt, and the pirates had grown arrogant, confident that no one could take the colony from them. That's where Kane saw his opportunity. "They're expecting another fleet," Kane told his crew during the mission briefing, a holographic map of the colony flickering before them. "We're not giving them one. Instead, we're going to hit them where they least expect it." Varric leaned over the map, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "We'll need a distraction." Kane nodded. "Exactly. Joran and Cass will create one hell of a diversion, blow their supply depot and bait their forces into the canyon. Meanwhile, the rest of us will infiltrate the main compound using their own smuggling tunnels. Once we take the command center, the colony is ours." The plan was bold, even by Kane's standards, but that was the point. The pirates believed they were untouchable, and Kane intended to prove them wrong. On the day of the assault, Joran and Cass executed the distraction with brutal precision. Explosions rocked the pirate encampment, sending guards scrambling toward the canyon in pursuit of the phantom attackers. Meanwhile, Kane led his infiltration team through the narrow, twisting tunnels beneath the colony. The team moved in silence, the only sound the faint hum of Talia's cybernetics as she scanned for hidden traps. They encountered minimal resistance, just a few unlucky guards who were swiftly dispatched with silenced weapons. When they reached the heart of the compound, Kane wasted no time. He stormed the command center with his team at his back, neutralizing the surprised pirate leaders in seconds. The mercenaries moved like a well-oiled machine, securing the room and locking down the colony's defenses before the pirates could regroup. With the command center under their control, Kane activated the colony's internal defense systems, turning them against the remaining pirates. Automated turrets sprang to life, cutting down the enemy forces as they retreated from the canyon. In less than an hour, the battle was over. The colony belonged to Kane. As the dust settled, Varric stood beside him, surveying the carnage with a satisfied nod. "I have to hand it to you, human. You've got a talent for making the impossible look easy." Kane smirked. "It's all about knowing when to hit and when to disappear." The victory was swift and decisive, but what came after was even more valuable. The governor was so impressed by Kane's efficiency that he paid a hefty bonus, far more than the original contract promised. But more importantly, the story of Kane's triumph spread across the stars. He wasn't just a mercenary anymore. He was a symbol, a rogue commander who could do what entire armies couldn't. Planets whispered his name in awe and fear. Leaders across the galaxy began to seek his services, not just to win battles, but to shape the fate of entire star systems. But with fame came complications. Governments and rival mercenary factions grew wary of Kane's growing influence. Some tried to recruit him, offering power and wealth beyond imagination. Others sought to eliminate him, fearing what a man like Kane could become if left unchecked. The crew's next mission made it clear just how dangerous Kane's reputation had become. They were hired by a coalition of rebels fighting against an oppressive regime on a distant world. The rebels needed a leader, someone who could outsmart the regime's military and inspire their scattered forces to unite. Kane accepted the contract, but as the mission unfolded, he realized something was off. The rebels weren't just desperate. They were being hunted. The regime had anticipated the rebellion and set a trap, waiting for the Mercenary King to walk right into it. It was the closest Kane had come to losing everything. The ambush was brutal. The rebels were outmatched. The regime's forces armed with advanced weaponry and tactical knowledge that suggested they'd been studying Kane's strategies. The crew fought tooth and nail to survive, but it was clear that someone had tipped off the enemy. Betrayal. The word burned in Kane's mind as he led his team through the firefight, his instincts kicking in with razor-sharp precision. He ordered a tactical retreat, sacrificing ground to buy time. The rebels scattered, and the crew made their way to an old smuggler's outpost hidden deep within the planet's wilderness. It was there, amid the wreckage of broken alliances and shattered trust, that Kane made a vow. He would find out who had sold them out, and he would make them pay. No one betrayed the Mercenary King and lived to tell the tale. As the crew regrouped and patched up their wounds, Kane sat at the edge of the campfire, his mind already working through the next steps. The galaxy thought it could outsmart him, that it could break him with deception and betrayal, but they were wrong. Varric sat beside him, nursing a bottle of alien whiskey. "What now, boss?" Kane stared into the flickering flames, his expression hard and unforgiving. "Now," he said quietly, "now we hunt." The next chapter of Kane's story was just beginning, and this time it wasn't about winning battles or earning credits. This was personal, because in the cold, dark expanse of space, there was one rule that Kane lived by. No one crosses the Mercenary King and gets away with it. With a cold determination burning in his eyes, Kane stood, the firelight casting jagged shadows across his face. "We make them remember who we are." And with that, the hunt began. The search for the traitor took Kane and his crew across the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Every ally was a potential enemy, every deal a test of loyalty. They scoured black markets, pirate havens, and diplomatic circles, unraveling a web of deceit that stretched far beyond what Kane had expected. The betrayal was more than just a rogue informant. It was a calculated strike, orchestrated by powerful players who feared what Kane was becoming. Rumors swirled like debris in the vacuum of space. Rival mercenary leaders whispered of secret alliances, planetary governments spoke of clandestine meetings, and criminal syndicates hinted at deeper conspiracies. Every step forward revealed another layer of intrigue, and it soon became clear that the ambush on the rebel world was just the beginning. The crew pursued leads tirelessly, following faint trails that led them into the dens of thieves and the halls of the elite. Varric's claws traced encrypted messages. Cass's sniper instincts spotted potential traps before they could spring, and Lyric's silver tongue opened doors that should have remained shut. But it was Kane's relentless drive that pushed them onward. He couldn't afford to stop, not until he uncovered the truth. Their journey eventually brought them to Draluk Station, an ancient trade hub on the edge of neutral space. It was a place where secrets were traded like currency, and every alley hid a potential informant or assassin. Kane had arranged a meeting with a former rival, a mercenary leader named Rax, who now dealt in information. Rax was known for his greed, but he also valued survival, and betraying Kane had a way of shortening life expectancy. The meeting took place in a shadowy corner of a cantina, away from prying eyes. Rax, a scarred veteran with more cybernetic limbs than natural ones, leaned forward as Kane and his crew took their seats. His artificial eye whirred softly, scanning them for weapons. "I hear you've been making a lot of noise, Kane," Rax said, his voice gravelly from years of smoke and betrayal. "Word is, you're chasing ghosts. Dangerous game." Kane didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Someone sold me out. You know who it was." Rax gave a humorless chuckle. "You think information comes cheap? This kind of intel will cost you." Kane leaned forward, his gaze cold and steady. "The only thing it'll cost you is your life if you don't start talking." Rax's grin faltered. He knew Kane wasn't bluffing. The room grew heavy with tension, the weight of unspoken violence hanging in the air. After a long pause, Rax exhaled and leaned closer, lowering his voice. "It wasn't just one person. It was a syndicate, a coalition of factions. You've been getting too powerful, Kane. Too many people are afraid of what you'll become." Kane's jaw clenched. "Who's pulling the strings?" Rax hesitated for a moment, then tapped a sequence on his wrist device. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a list of names and factions, mercenary groups, political leaders, and corporate elites, all connected by a shared interest in Kane's downfall. At the top of the list was a name that made Kane's blood run cold: General Kalen Voss. Voss had been a celebrated military commander in the same fleet Kane had once served. He was ruthless, brilliant, and obsessed with control. Kane and Voss had clashed during their service, each representing a different vision of war. Kane believed in adaptability and survival, while Voss saw only discipline and order. Their conflict had ended with Kane walking away from the military and Voss rising through the ranks, amassing power and influence across the galaxy. Now, it seemed, Voss had decided that the Mercenary King was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Kane stood, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "Voss," he muttered under his breath, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. Varick's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "He must be coordinating with the syndicate. They've been watching you for a long time." Kane nodded. "This isn't just about money or territory. This is personal." The crew exchanged glances, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. Voss wasn't just another enemy. He was a man who knew Kane better than anyone else. He would be waiting, anticipating Kane's every move. And yet, Kane felt something stir deep within him, a fierce, unrelenting determination. Voss thought he could predict him, but Kane wasn't the same man he'd been in the military. He was something more now, something dangerous. Rax shifted nervously in his seat. "If you're going after Voss, you'll need an army. He's got fleets, private contractors, and syndicate backing. You can't just waltz in and expect to win." Kane gave a small, dangerous smile. Who said anything about waltzing? The next phase of Kane's plan was unlike anything his crew had seen before. He didn't gather an army. He built a strategy. Instead of meeting Voss head-on, Kane launched a series of precision strikes against the general's allies and resources. The crew hit mercenary bases in the dead of night, stole crucial intel from corporate strongholds, and sabotaged supply lines feeding Voss's forces. They left no trace, disappearing before anyone could react. Every victory was a piece of the puzzle, carefully dismantling Voss's power from the shadows. The galaxy whispered tales of the Mercenary King's return, more dangerous than ever. Kane wasn't just fighting a war. He was waging a campaign of fear and uncertainty. His enemies couldn't sleep, couldn't trust their allies, and couldn't predict where he would strike next. Each victory brought them closer to Voss, but it also painted a target on Kane's back. The syndicate doubled its efforts to find him, hiring bounty hunters and spies to track his movements. The galaxy was closing in, but Kane thrived in the pressure. It was in the midst of this chaos that Kane made his boldest move yet. He sent Voss a message. The transmission was brief and to the point, an invitation to meet face to face. Kane offered Voss a chance to end things without further bloodshed, to settle their differences once and for all. Varick voiced his concern as they prepared for the rendezvous. "This could be a trap," Kane smirked. "It's always a trap. The trick is making sure it's their trap, not ours." They chose a neutral location, a derelict space station floating in the void, abandoned long ago by its creators. It was the perfect stage for their final confrontation. When Voss arrived, flanked by armed guards, he found Kane waiting in the shadows. The Mercenary King stood alone, his presence radiating confidence and control. For a moment, the two men regarded each other in silence. Years of history, conflict, and betrayal hung between them like a heavy curtain. Voss's voice was cold and precise. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Kane." Kane gave a small, humorless laugh. "You always did hate when things didn't go according to plan." Voss's eyes narrowed. "You could have been great. We could have built something together." Kane shook his head, his expression hardening. "You never understood, Voss. Greatness isn't about control, it's about freedom." Voss's jaw tightened. "Freedom is an illusion. Order is the only way." Kane stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "That's where you're wrong, and tonight, I'm going to show you just how wrong you are." The standoff had begun, and with it, the fate of the Mercenary King and the galaxy hung in the balance. The derelict space station groaned under the weight of time and neglect, its hollow corridors echoing with the soft hum of decaying systems. Kane stood still, facing General Voss across a dimly lit chamber, his senses heightened. This confrontation had been a long time coming, years of unspoken conflict, unresolved tension, and shattered ideals, and now, only one would walk away victorious. Voss's guards spread out, their weapons trained on Kane. They wore precision armor, their movements crisp, a testament to the order Voss demanded. But Kane was undeterred. Order was predictable, something Kane had spent his life exploiting. "You're outnumbered," Voss said, a smug grin forming at the corner of his mouth. "Do you really think this ends in anything other than your defeat?" Kane's reply was calm, almost bored. "You always did love numbers, Voss. But outnumbered doesn't mean outmatched." With a subtle gesture, Kane activated a signal on his wrist communicator. A faint hum reverberated through the station, followed by flickers of light, cloaked drones, hidden in the station's rafters, revealing themselves. Kane's crew had been preparing for this meeting long before Voss had stepped aboard. The drones sprang into action, disabling the guards' weapons with precise electromagnetic pulses. In an instant, Voss's men were disarmed, caught between shock and confusion. Before they could react, Kane moved. He darted forward, striking one guard in the throat with the hilt of his blade, sending him crumpling to the floor. Kane fought like a force of nature, fluid, calculated, and unforgiving. Each movement was deliberate, each strike aimed to incapacitate rather than kill. Within seconds, the guards lay scattered, groaning on the ground, their weapons useless. Voss, however, remained standing, unfazed. This was the confrontation he had wanted, a chance to finally end the rivalry that had haunted him for years. He drew his sidearm, a sleek plasma pistol, and leveled it at Kane. "You always were talented," Voss said, his tone cold. "But talent alone doesn't win wars." Kane smiled, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Good thing I've got more than just talent." With a flick of his wrist, Kane deployed a small spherical device, a tactical disruptor. The chamber plunged into darkness, the lights flickering out as the disruptor scrambled the station's systems. Both men were cast into the void, shadows swallowing them whole. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. In the pitch-black chamber, Voss moved with precision, using his military training to his advantage. But Kane was no ordinary opponent. He thrived in chaos. The sound of footsteps echoed through the darkness, each step a potential threat. Voss fired his plasma pistol at shadows, but Kane was always a step ahead, slipping through the dark like a phantom. It wasn't brute force that would win this battle. It was control over the environment, over the mind. "Do you know what your problem is, Voss?" Kane's voice echoed from the shadows, taunting and calm. "You think control is power, but real power? It's knowing when to let go." Voss spun, firing blindly into the darkness. The blast missed. Again, frustration began to creep into his usually controlled demeanor, his breaths becoming shallow, his shots less calculated. He was losing control, and Kane knew it. "You never learned how to adapt," Kane continued, his voice circling Voss like a predator stalking its prey. "That's why I left the military, and that's why you'll lose tonight." Voss growled in frustration, firing another shot into the void, but it was too late. Kane had already moved in for the kill. In one swift motion, Kane disarmed Voss, twisting the plasma pistol from his grip and pinning him against the wall. Their faces were inches apart, two men locked in a battle of wills, neither willing to yield. "You always thought you could control me," Kane whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "But I'm not yours to command." Voss sneered, his eyes filled with defiance. "Do it then. End it." For a moment, Kane's grip tightened, his knuckles white against Voss's uniform. The temptation to end it all, to finish the rivalry once and for all, burned within him. But something held him back, something deeper than vengeance, a choice. "I'm not like you, Voss," Kane said quietly, releasing him. "That's why I win, and that's why you lose." Voss slumped against the wall, defeated but alive. The rivalry was over. Kane had proven his point, not through violence, but through restraint. With Voss neutralized, Kane turned his attention to the larger battle still unfolding across the galaxy. The syndicate that had aligned with Voss wasn't going to disappear overnight, but without Voss's leadership, it was vulnerable. It was time to finish what he had started. He activated his comm, signaling to his crew. "Varek, Cass, Lyric, initiate Phase 2. We're cutting the head off the syndicate. A series of affirmations crackled through the comms. The crew had been waiting for this moment, prepared for the final strike. They knew what was at stake. Not just their own survival, but the future of the galaxy. Kane stepped away from Voss, leaving him slumped against the wall, and made his way toward the station's control room. The battle wasn't over, but the Mercenary King wasn't finished either. As he walked, his mind raced with possibilities. The galaxy was changing, alliances shifting, power structures crumbling. It was a dangerous time, but for Kane, it was also an opportunity. People like Voss think power is about control, Kane muttered to himself, a wry smile tugging at his lips. But real power? It's knowing when to walk away. And with that, Kane strode into the control room, ready to deliver the final blow to the syndicate that had dared to cross him. The galaxy belonged to those who could adapt, those who could survive the chaos. And no one did chaos better than the Mercenary King. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. As Kane stood in the command center of the derelict station, he watched the final stages of his plan unfold through holographic projections. Across multiple screens, his fleet, an amalgamation of rogue ships, former enemies, and hired guns, executed the final strikes against the Syndicate's strongholds. Explosions dotted the surface of moons, battles raged in orbit, and hidden bases blinked out of existence, one after another. It was a symphony of precision and chaos, the exact balance Kane had perfected over the years. His crew knew their roles, each move calculated to dismantle the enemy's infrastructure while sending a clear message. The Mercenary King always finishes what he starts. The voice of his pilot, Cass, crackled through the communication. "Boss, the Syndicate's last fleet is scattering. Looks like they're done." There was a pause and then a soft chuckle. "Another impossible mission in the bag. You've really got a thing for this stuff, huh?" Kane allowed himself a small grin. "It's not about the mission, Cass. It's about the outcome." He shut off the comm and turned to the hologram. Voss's empire lay in ruins, his ambitions shattered. Just another tyrant who had learned, too late, that brute force wasn't enough to win. With the battle over, Kane made his way back to his ship, the Revenant. The corridors of the station were eerily quiet now, a sharp contrast to the earlier chaos. Victory was never loud. It was found in the silence that followed. As he entered the ship, the familiar hum of the engines greeted him. His crew was waiting. Varric, the scarred and pragmatic weapons expert, Cass, his sharp-tongued pilot, and Lyric, their enigmatic hacker who had cracked the Syndicate's systems wide open. They looked at him expectantly. In this moment, Kane wasn't just their leader, he was their anchor. "It's done," he said simply, the weight of the past few years evident in his voice. "Voss is out. The Syndicate's finished." Varric leaned back against the wall, arms folded. "So, what now? Do we ride off into the sunset, or do we find another galaxy to save?" Lyric smirked. Knowing Kane, probably both. Kane's grin was brief but genuine. "There's always another fight. But this one, it's over." Later that night, in the quiet refuge of the Revenant's mess hall, the crew gathered around a battered old table, sharing drinks and stories. It was a rare moment of peace, a reminder that even warriors needed a moment to breathe. Cass leaned back in her chair, swirling a glass of whiskey. "You know, boss, I gotta ask, how do you do it? How do you keep winning when every damn battle seems impossible?" Kane shrugged, staring at the stars through the viewport. "Because I know what I'm fighting for." The room fell silent as his words settled over them. For Kane, it was never about glory, never about power. It was about survival, his own, and that of the people who fought beside him. He fought because he refused to let the galaxy decide his fate. Varric raised his glass. "To the impossible." The others followed suit, clinking their glasses together. "To the impossible," they echoed. As the ship drifted through the stars, Kane found himself alone on the bridge, staring into the vast expanse of space. He had won countless battles, defeated enemies who thought themselves invincible, and outwitted those who underestimated him. And yet, the galaxy stretched endlessly before him, full of new challenges, new enemies, and new possibilities. For a moment, he allowed himself to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From a soldier abandoned by the system to a legend whispered across the stars. He was no hero, but neither was he a villain. He was simply a man who refused to be defined by anyone but himself. The comm panel beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Lyric, her voice calm but curious. "We've got some interesting offers coming in. Some colonies need protection. There's also word of a new power rising in the Outer Rim. What's the call, boss?" Kane smiled to himself, the answer already clear. "We go where we're needed, Lyric. Same as always. He cut the transmission and leaned back in his seat, watching the stars drift by. The galaxy would always be full of tyrants and fools, people who thought they could control the chaos. But Kane had learned long ago that control was an illusion. The only thing that mattered was survival, and for that, Kane would always be ready. He stood, hands resting on the console as he gave the only order that mattered. Cass, set a course. Let's see what's next. The Revenant's engines roared to life, the ship cutting through the void like a blade through darkness, and as the stars blurred into streaks of light, Kane allowed himself one final thought. The Mercenary King wasn't finished, not by a long shot, because in a galaxy that thrived on chaos, the legend of the man who thrived in it was far from over.